Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Marc D. Braun. I will tell you all about Marc in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's so often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the compassion, and the courage we exert for others. But when you do it as a leader, and you will definitely discover that Marc D. Braun is such a leader, you do it with the purpose of bringing people together for common cause. Marc D. Braun, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
It's great to be here with you, John, today.
Great. Well, I want to tell folks all about you. Marc is the former president of Cambridge Air Solutions. He's a chemical engineer by training, but after a whole long and successful career of building a very successful business, he decided to become an executive coach. And we're going to explore that. And he is a noted coach, and he coaches CEOs, presidents, you name the whole gamut. And what I liked about Marc, or not liked, but do like about Marc, is his purpose is to encourage. And as he says, breathe courage into others to help them achieve what they were intended to achieve. I love that kind of statement. And Marc knows what it's like to be in the saddle, because he was in there for a long time. He was at the very top. His business was extraordinarily successful, so successful that it became an icon, an exemplar for other companies to study, not just for its successful performance, but its culture. So Marc D. Braun, it is a pleasure to bring you on Grace Under Pressure. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Okay. Marc, tell us about your journey. You started as a chemical engineer and went into business and ended up where you are now. Are you nuts?
Well, I'm just thinking about what part of the journey to share, but yes, I am nuts. I think about,
well, Marc, we coaches, we don't know anything about business, and you're a successful executive, president of a company, and you become an executive coach. What is it?
Yeah, well, I just think about going back to stepping out of college. So I did the chemical engineering degree, and I had some level of success on being able to take tests. I was good at taking tests. And then I stepped into the real world. And I found out that they don't give tests. Like there's nobody that hands out a test and you got to pass it. It's like every day is you got to show up and learn and grow. And so 6 months in, I'm feeling like I don't even know what I'm doing. And Herb Michael, he was a mentor of mine, early coach of mine. He sat me down. He had been there for 35 years. And he sat me down and he said, "Marc, I like you." I said, "That's really good. I like you too." He said, "You're smart." I said, "I'm so glad you noticed." Think about that, the ego stroke. And he said, if you don't change how you interact with the operators, you're going to be gone in 6 months.
I'm going to stop you right there, Marc, because you are a living exemplar of what I have heard from so many successful executives whom I've coached. And they get to the top, and we often make this assumption, oh, it was just a smooth ride. But someone invariably had the conversation that you just had. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, and thank you to Herb. I'm so grateful for him, seeing a young person and speaking into their life, and then coaching me, saying, hey, you can change this. He gave me a couple books to read and said, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and How to Win Friends and Influence People. And then he said, let's keep on talking. And that started literally 27 years of learning that the people relationships, how to help other people succeed, was the key. And there weren't going to be any other tests. I wasn't going to get a multiple choice test ever again. And so that really started the journey. And then I guess my first executive coach that I hired outside was 20 years ago, because I'd gotten to a position where I was leading at that point and leading people. And I felt stuck and overwhelmed. And there was nobody above me who was ready to coach me. And so I went out and searched for a coach. And I remember how much better I felt, how much more confidence I had, and how much more comfort I had leading at that role. And it was all because he was walking alongside me and coaching me. And so I've had coaches in my life ever since, from Herb to paid externally to leaders that I've worked for and with, and mentors that I've just gotten to know. And it's the most valuable thing that ever happened to me, is having some other people in my life speaking into me as a coach.
Well, that's great. I like that story. And so your former business, Cambridge Air,
Sure.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yes. So was a well-studied example of culture and leadership. What was the secret sauce? Or tell me there was no secret sauce. It just was a lot of hard work. So.
It was a lot of hard work, some miracles along the way, and courage. When I stepped into that organization, the current CEO and owner, John Kramer, he was a friend of mine, and he said he wanted to grow the business. And I asked him the question that I was asked as a coaching client before, which is, are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to change your own leadership? And he said yes, he would do whatever it took to change his own leadership. And over the 13-year run that we had together, where I continued to lead and he continued to grow and learn and lead at different levels, we got to work together. And so the coaching that we did, I ended up using that same coaching skills to be able to coach the executive team. When I exited July of last year, we had 3 executives all ready to step into the role of president.
That is very exceptional, Mark. I want to stop you on that, because so often, and our friend Gary Ridge is a living example of this, it's how you leave the organization. And if you have 3 people ready to step into your role, that's extraordinary. You deserve a pat on the back for that. So.
Well, I think that it was just coaching and training from coaches that I'd had. And then they did the work. Those executives did the work to grow. I didn't do the work, they did it. But it's coaching and allowing them to do that and encouraging them to do that allowed them to do it. And so, yeah, it's very, I'm very proud of them and proud of the work that we got to do together.
Great. I want to explore something because I don't often get to, but it's a facet of leadership that we don't talk about enough. And you have lived it and coached it too. And that's, why did you leave? You're at the top of your business. What motivated you to leave? So.
It's a great question. So you mentioned it was incredible that I had 3 executives ready to do my role. I actually saw it also in reflection, I saw it as a sign of weakness as well. I normally get to a point where I have 1 person ready to take on the role, and then I get out of their way so that they can do the role that I had, and then they can grow and I can go off and do the next role. What I found was that I wasn't wanting to leave. I wanted to stay because I loved it. And it was about a year and a half ago, well, actually 2 years now, that I sat down with the owner and I said, I've got this team ready to step in and lead where I'm at. And I need to go on to the next role. And it was scary to do that. For me, the coaches in my life said, it's just your next step in life. You've got to keep on growing and learning. And so normally you want to have only 1 person ready for your role, not 3. Because you're ready actually for the next role. And there wasn't anywhere else to go in that company. And so we needed to go out and help other CEOs do the same work.
That's great. So so I'm sure the coaching conversation you may have what can leaders learn from your leave taking? What's the takeaway that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I think a couple takeaways. One is that every employee in every organization, whether you're calling yourself a leader or not, I believe there's 2 choices in work and in life. You can either stay well in the role that you're at or leave well. Leaving poorly is not a great strategy, and staying, even though you don't want to stay, is not a great strategy. And so being able to do that, I've written on it, I've lived it. It was the greatest piece of advice my dad ever gave me was you want to leave well. And leaving well means that you have an open invite back. You have cleaned up all the projects that you need to clean up. They're in a position to succeed. You care about them. And their growth afterwards. And so that's lesson number 1. Choose wisely to leave well or stay well, and get in a position. If you want to leave, get in a position to do so. So it took me a year to get in a position to leave after I had made the announcement to the owner.
Well, the flip side of what you said, and I like the term leaving well, it's aspirational and affirmative, is don't burn any bridges when you leave. So I guess you didn't burn any bridges. So
well, that was the whole goal, and you can't control it all. But what I like about leave well versus burning bridges is normally you do the minimum not to burn the bridge. If you want to aspire to leaving well, you end up saying, what is the list that's going to be needed to execute to leave well? And so it raises the standard. Every role that I've had before this one have had a leave of absence from the role to go out and come back anytime. So Dow Chemical and Coke they've given me a leave of absence and just said, come back anytime. And I love that aim. That would be the ultimate aim, is like, just an open invite back. Check the box. He can come back anytime.
Yeah,
that's
wonderful, because that's an affirmation of what you have done for them and help them build and become different and successful. So you are hard at work at a forthcoming book called Courageous Growth. So what's the difference between ordinary growth, which is a goal of most companies, and courageous growth? What's the meaning of that title, Mark?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. So, strategic growth versus courageous growth. And, most people are looking for ideas for how something that they own could grow. They want their assets to grow. They want the business to grow. They're not normally looking for things that get them to grow. And their own leadership is when they decide that the pace of growth of the business is correlated directly to the pace of growth of themselves as a CEO or leader. And they decide to say, I'm going to intentionally step out of my comfort zone, be courageous, and decide to grow intentionally. That's what courageous growth is. And I'm not going to use strategies only to grow. I'm going to focus the attention on my own growth, and the strategies will be able to come alongside that instead of the other way around. Instead of the easy way around.
Yeah, and I think that's what you've said it, because you lived it and you work with it, and it's that courage. So when we use the word courage a great deal, how do you define it? What does it mean in the context in which you operate, Mark?
Yeah. So I ask this question often. I'll just give you an example. When somebody comes into me yesterday, I was sitting down with a leader, and he said he has too many Zoom meetings. And he's got 8 hours of Zoom meetings. And I said, okay, well, how many do you want? And he said, I want at least half of that. I don't want more than half of that. I said, okay. I said, well, who have you told about that? He said, nobody. I said, well, would you tell your boss about that? Would you tell your leader about that? He said, I don't think I can. I said, okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how uncomfortable are you telling the leader that you have about this? And he said it was an 8 out of 10 discomfort. And so I said, that's perfect. That will require courage to do. We actually need something that we're going to go out and do that's uncomfortable for us to go out and do. We know we want something. He wanted less time on Zoom to make his life balance. And he was not going to tell anybody about it. And it takes courage to go out and share what you're uncomfortable sharing. And so that afternoon, he planned for it. He prepared for it, role played for it, and then had that conversation with his boss. And now he feels better because the boss actually said, you know what, I'm struggling with that too. And so I would love to work with you on that. But he was scared. We have to be scared to be courageous. We have to be afraid to actually step out of our comfort zone.
Well, so often it's been said that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the management of fear. And many have said that. John McCain, Franklin Roosevelt, and so many others. There's another form of courage too, and it's one that Jack Kennedy talked about. And he said it's not so much the courage of the heroic moment. And he was very definitely a war hero in what he did. And in the South Pacific when his PT boat was sunk. But it's the courage of dealing with day-to-day. For him, it was intense physical pain. But for others, it's that we don't know the demons that others are facing or the challenges or things like that. So do you focus on those kinds of things, Mark, when you work with your clients? So.
Well, I mean, I think there's two things you said there. One of the practicing courage doesn't wait for the heroic moment. It works in the daily grind of being able to share ourselves openly, the feelings and emotions we have, the open wants and desires, the dreams we have with other people around us, and the pains and struggles that we're facing. And being able to share those with other people takes enormous courage. And so, yes, we deal with all of that, whatever it is that's holding the leader back. And sometimes those are relationships with their family. Sometimes those are relationships with their peers. Sometimes it's relationships with the people on their team. It is often emotional relationships of some kind. And so.
And that's important because when I speak about coaching, whether it's for someone I'm coaching or a prospective client or just coaching, in general, and I'm sure you do the same. We talk about it it requires courage to be coached. Would you agree with that, Mark?
100%. I was most scared of asking for help, and coaching is saying, I don't have all the answers. I need some help with this. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to the point where I was unafraid of asking for help, that was part of the coachability. And so it takes enormous courage to get over the fear of I can't do everything myself. Right. And some people have no problem asking for help, and so they need courage to act with less help. Some people need courage to move. And whichever side of the equation. When I'm working with CEOs, normally it's because they're struggling. They don't ask for help as often as they need.
Well, great. And that's something that it's perceived as a weakness, or and vulnerability now. Particularly, it's a heightened awareness because of our pandemic. So if there's any positive, that's one small positive. We feel more comfortable expressing our sense of vulnerability.
We do, and I think the word vulnerable. I think about nobody wants to be vulnerable. I mean, it's a risky thing. And so it's interesting. I love Brene Brown's work, and I've processed quite a bit of that, just working on my own ability and willingness to expose my vulnerabilities. I really like focusing on the courage that is required for being vulnerable. And you can be courageous in a lot of different ways, honest, open, and willing. You just have to be able to share what's really going on.
Great. And so getting back to, what have you learned about courage in your exploration and your writing? What have you learned about it?
Yeah. Well, I have to take you through one story. Our family has 4 boys. One of them is adopted. And it was 11 years ago that he came back from Iraq and served in the Army. And he was struggling. He was struggling with addiction and depression and life. And we worked as hard as we could to save that young man's life, and lost him on August 12th, 2012. And while we were working in helping him, went into the recovery system. And the recovery system is basically helping him recover from all the trauma and the addictions and all of those pieces of life. And what I saw some of the most courageous people I've ever met in my life, people that were overcoming obstacles that I hadn't even imagined could be overcome. And the courage required to be able to recover from great challenge is what taught me the deepest level of courage. My life the last 11 years has been recovering from that loss in our family, and has required courage. My wife and I processing that, figuring out what it is to look at, be grateful for out of that, and what we learned from that. And so I think that's the deepest work that we've done. What I like about having that work in my history is that we never hit anything in the coaching practice that's deeper than that. We hit some deep stuff, but it's like, okay, it's okay. We can get through this together. Right. And so it takes courage.
Well, I want to put in a personal aside here, because I've actually met your wife. And the reason I met your wife was because I was a tag along for a dinner that you had scheduled. And you said, oh, come along. And you were so welcoming and gracious. And watching you and your wife together you both radiated optimism. And you and projected that, and it was a welcoming spirit. So whatever you're doing is working. I'm going to say, but so you have a depth to you that is evident. So I wanted to comment on that. So.
Well, I think that's come from many years of working through fears and courageously stepping out and helping and learning and growing. And people have poured into us from all angles to be able to help. And she is an incredible resource of strength for me. She actually joined me in this business. And so she works alongside me. And so it's really fun.
Well, that's great. So I'm going to ask a question. It might sound obvious, but I want to discuss it. Can you coach courage, Mark?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I've bet the farm on that. And I've been doing it inside of companies for the last 13 years inside of Cambridge. And now we have 12 coaching clients that we're doing it for, and watching them grow, watching them step out of their comfort zone over and over, and watching the results of that on their businesses and on their teams and on their families has been just, it lights up all the dopamine sensors in my brain. And so the answer is evidentially yes, and experientially yes. You can coach for courage.
And that is so encouraging, because sometimes I think that we often think maybe a layperson will sit back and they go, well, that's courage, and they have it and I don't, or they have something special. But you are proving that by the folks you're working with, that it can be coached, it can be taught. So.
Yeah. And I think about, I was with one of my coaches about 10 years ago. I was stepping in a new role and growing, and I was scared, and I was sitting with him, and he patted me on the shoulder and he said, Mark, it's okay. I can tell you're scared of this next step. I'm not scared of the next step. I'm going to be with you along the whole journey. You're going to have to do the work, but I'm going to walk right beside you. He said, you can put your hand on my shoulder, and as soon as you fall or stumble, I'll just pick you back up and you'll keep on walking. You've got this. That is encouragement. That is coaching. That is what I get to do in my life. I won't ever stop doing that, because it's just such a beautiful way to pour into other people's lives. If I get the privilege of doing it with them, I would do it.
Good. That's wonderful. And so now we're going to just flip it to the other half of your title, which is growth. So can you coach growth? So
Yeah. So growth for me, if you think about comfort zone in personal growth, you're comfortable with this much right now, and everybody is comfortable with a certain amount of things. They've all got their own personal experiences and backgrounds and personalities, and they're comfortable with this. And what growth is expanding your comfort zone. It's not just stepping out of your comfort zone. It's actually working to expand it. So tomorrow, we want you to be more comfortable doing things that you aren't comfortable with today. And that would be growth. And so that will lead to business growth, but we're after the growth of you as a human being, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a wife, as a daughter. We're after the work to grow you as a human being. And when I see people, one of the gifts that I feel like I've been given is I can see the potential, and it's just huge. Every person I ever see, I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I just want to help them step into that potential and keep on learning and growing.
Great. That's good. We had a question from someone prior to the show, and I'll weave it in here. When you're under stress, do you need to be transactional or transformative, or what's your perception on that, Mark? So,
when I'm in stress?
When a leader is under stress. And my understanding of it is that leadership is both transactional and transformative. Most often it's transactional. What would be your perception of that, Mark? So
I wonder, I'm just thinking about, so anxiety, which is normally what we feel when we're under stress. We feel some anxiety level. And what many leaders do is they walk back in with that anxiety and they spread that, like they vomit it all over their people. And it's like, whoa, it's not a great leadership trait. And so
that is a powerful image. So
yeah. So having somewhere outside where they can sit and be able to share that when that's happening. I get messages from them and say they write to my phone that says, hey, I'm anxious about this. I say, great, let's talk about it. And we want to get them less anxious before they go back in and lead, because anxiety doesn't lead well. It's not great, but it's normal to feel it. And so when you're stressed, being able to slow that pace down, get that energy to somewhere that you can actually talk it through, and then be able to go back in with a plan or whatever the next step is that you're needing to take. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
it's the practical thing, and I think sometimes I'm glad you focused on the anxiety part of it, because leadership, I've often believed, and it's not me, leadership is an act, and that's not meaning that you're dissembling, but that you need to project a certain self in order to encourage others to follow. And so feeling that anxiety, but finding ways to deal with it is important. So
yeah, definitely. I see a comment coming in. What number one issue or challenge does he see most that holds people back these days? I mean, that was a question from Joe, and I think about fear is the thing that holds us back. And so being able to answer what it is that I'm afraid of with somebody, processing that fear, and then being able to figure out that you're going to act in the face of fear, which is the definition of courage. I'm still going to take action in the face of fear. That's the biggest thing that holds people back, is fear of the unknown, fear of what's next, fear of not being enough. There's all kinds of fears, but they're fear.
And then that's where the courage enters, to taking that step to move forward in a positive sense. And also, what does failure teach us about courage, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I love the owner of Swank here in St. Louis shared that her dad would ask her every night at dinner, "What did you fail at today?" Most people would say, "What went well?" And she would get asked, "What did you fail at today?" He normalized the process of failure. Gary Ridge says learning moments. He's trying to normalize the mistakes that we make. I believe that we've got three things. Normally, we aim for success. We don't like mistakes, but we'll accept them as long as we learn from them. And then failure is not an option. So that's what we're normally taught by the social promise.
Right.
And I believe it's the backwards way to teach. Failure is inevitable if you're trying anything hard. So get used to it and be ready to process it and learn from it. Mistakes are awesome because they let you learn. And if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying anything. And then success will happen if you try those first two things. And so if you flip the script, if you allow yourself to understand that failure is just part of the process of being able to go out and try things as humans, it's the way we learn. And so keep on trying things and learn to normalize failure.
Well, this has been such a good conversation, and we're racing along. And I know there's so much more time I could take from you, but I'm not going to. But I am going to ask you a question I ask every guest. Do you have a story about grace that you want to share with us, Mark?
Well, I think about, what you call grace. And I think about the practice of gratitude and the relationship between the two. And so for me, I shared the story a little bit about Ryan and learning about what the tragedy, what we can be grateful for in the face of tragedy. And for me, gratitude's a practice that I can do to be able to feel the grace that's given to me about so many things that I have no control over. I got up, I was just thinking about it on the way in to work today. I have air that enters my lungs, and I didn't do anything to turn the oxygen into usable energy for me. It converted all of that food for me, and it just makes it all happen. And somehow, without the idea of gratitude and grace, I think that I did it. Like, what? Or I take it for granted, and I just leave it on the side, and I get focused on only what's wrong in my life. And so for me, grace and gratitude go hand in hand. Practicing gratitude helps me recognize the grace in my life in so many small and ordinary details, everywhere, the relationships, the people that are in my life, the people that pour in, and the things that go well for me that I had no control over. So that's what I would share.
Well, that's a wonderful holistic looking thing at it. And there's something that you have mentioned a couple of times, and you use the word breath. And that's near and dear to my heart because I've written about inspiration, and I know that and inspirare is the Latin from which inspiration comes from, and it is the breathing into. So I love that. So that breathing in that you're talking about, there's something in there, Mark. But you're breathing in, and then I would say you're breathing out, and your breathing out is giving people insight and inspiration, and you're guiding them along. And so it has been such a privilege to speak to you, Mark.
An honor.
And how can people find you? So
marcdbraun.com, spelled with a C, M-A-R-C-D, Braun, B-R-A-U-N.com. Would love to spend 15 minutes talking and just hearing your stories. And if there's some way to help you build a courageous growth culture, would love to talk about how to do that with you.
Correct. Mark, it's been a privilege. And with that, we're going to go out. So